It's supposed to be lunchtime now, I think, there.
You've got to have lunch, Mr. Lee. Sometimes you don't have lunch.
Late lunch after us.
Yes.
Supposed to be lunchtime now, I think, there.
Got to have lunch, Mr. Lee. Sometimes you don't have lunch.
Oh, what is it, macam tu?
That's the YouTube delay.
Oh, YouTube. Oh. YouTube. Joe, YouTube must not interfere lah dalam sini.
Huh?
YouTube dari dia record dia mau sini. Supposed to be lunchtime now, I think, there. Tengok.
Got to have lunch, Mr. Lee. Sometimes you don't have lunch.
Oh, what is it, macam tu? YouTube.
That's the YouTube.
YouTube.
We're getting some sort of echo, are we? Somehow.
Yeah.
We would keep talking and check to see whether it's been fixed or not. It may be coming from somebody else's microphone. I see.
Hello, you check anybody on the YouTube or not near our office?
Well, I think Joe's he turned his microphone off now, and we can't hear it anymore. So I think it's okay now.
Check, Amira, check, Make sure Hafiz ke siapa jangan on YouTube, Okay, Mira. Check Hafiz beside you jangan on YouTube. Carol,
Okay.
nobody on the YouTube, near our laptop. So don't open two devices. One YouTube, one Zoom. Okay, Joe, boleh main advertisement tu, tak apalah. Just keep on main. Sementara we let in the participant now. Let them come in now.
Do we want
You're
to
ready,
check?
Huh?
Do we want to check if they can share the screen? Okay, Paul can share his screen. Okay.
Paul, just try first.
So can you see the
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
fine.
Good.
Yeah.
Stop share.
Yeah, good.
Okay, good.
You want me to quickly try as well?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, Joe, boleh main tu, lepas tu let the participant ni. Where's Ruby? Let them in. Okay, Joe, boleh. Hello? Bagi dia orang masuk Joe.
Oh, iya.
Aku share.
Jom bagi dia orang masuk, bagi partisipan masuk. Jangan tunggu lagi.
Boleh ya?
Masuk dulu.
Boleh.
Lepas.
Okey. Okay, participants are coming in. We are live now.
Hello. Sorry.
Tunggu belum lagi.
Okay.
Main advertisement dulu tadi.
Kenapa participant besar? Dia tak boleh buat apa ni ke? Okey, aku jawab sini aja.
Okay, gentlemen, sorry. I think I don't know what's the reason why the participants are slow in coming in. Under our system, the webinar system, everybody who register before this, they will straight away get an email like what you have got, an email with the link. So they will get a link and then they should check in. But hopefully they will be able to check the email. Some may not do so.
I think a few people are watching it on YouTube as well that I've sent it to.
Yeah, I know there's some also watching YouTube. They inform us, but then unless they change their mind and go to YouTube. Okay.
Shall we start anyway? Because I'm sure people will join in as we're going along.
Maybe we give it another 3 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, okay. If we let everybody know that it's going to be starting in a few minutes then.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
We'll start in a few minutes, around 10:10. Now
Okay.
it's 10:06 minutes.
Mira, you check whether the participant can hear us or not. Hello, morning to them. Welcome them.
Okay, good morning. Can everybody hear me?
You have to check.
Let me check attendees.
And they have to reply in the chat.
Yeah, looking.
Minta dia reply sikit.
Please reply in the chat box in the below. Okay, yeah. I got a reply
Jakarta,
already.
okay.
Yep, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Crystal Kira, okay.
Thank you so much. Morning. How are you guys? Are you guys okay? I hope everyone is safe. In the screen is our upcoming event on the 25th of March. You are welcome to register. Yeah, I think the attendees are now coming in more. If you are unable to watch us here on webinar, we also have a YouTube live viewing. You can go to our YouTube page, the Malaysian Water Association. And there will be a live viewing there. Now at the screen is a training conducted by the Malaysian Water Academy on 23rd to 24th of March. You are welcome to register. Okay, I guess we're starting now. Is that okay, Mr. Lee? Everyone's okay?
Okay.
All right, okay. Good morning, everyone. Greetings to Mr. Lee Kun Yu, our MWA Group Executive Director. Our speakers for today, Mr. Paul Harris, Head of Business Consulting, AL Utilities Australia, Mr. Farshad Ibrahimi, Head of Asset Management, AL Utilities Australia, and our moderator, Mr. Gary White, Senior Consultant, AL Utilities. You can see on the screen, you have Mr. Gary first, and Mr. Farshad, and Mr. Paul Harris. Welcome to MWA's second webinar in the year 2021 with a collaboration with AL Utilities. I'm Amira, and MWA Secretary MC for today. Just a little housekeeping before we start. Participants can use the chat box to identify your presence to others and say hello to friends and colleagues participating in the webinar. For Q&A, participants are requested to use the Q&A box in the Zoom control panel. Please type your questions there, and the moderator will pick out the questions during engagement session after the presentations. We will also have polling questions after the presentation. Participants are welcome to join. During the presentation and dialogue session, we will mute everyone to minimize interruption. If you have colleagues or friends that are interested to join our webinar for today, we are also available on YouTube. Please search the Malaysian Water Association page on YouTube for the live viewing. Today's topic is the International Benchmarking, a comparison of utility performance, investment, and best practices, presented by Mr. Paul Harris and Farshad Ibrahimi. Now, to welcome all of you, I'll pass the screen to MWA Group Executive Director, Mr. Lee Kun Yu, for his welcoming speech.
Okay, thank you. Can you all hear me? Boleh ya? Okay. Distinguished guests, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, I'm speaking on behalf of the President of the Malaysian Water Association, Dato' Abdul Kadir Mahdin. He apologizes that he can't come this morning as he has a last-minute appointment. So I will be speaking on his behalf this morning. So good morning and a very warm welcome to the MWA webinar on the International Benchmarking, a comparison of utilities performance, investment and best practices. Today we have the honor of having in our midst 3 international speakers, Mr. Gary Wyeth, who is a familiar figure among MW members, Mr. Paul Harris and Mr. Farshad Ibrahimi, all from the AL Utilities Australia. Paul was the program director for our 2020 leakage management benchmarking project, whereas Farshad has considerable experience across water, transport, and energy sectors, and has led the delivery of end-to-end asset management transformational programs internationally. To all 3 gentlemen, we wish you all a very warm welcome and thank you for coming and sharing your experience with us this morning. Paul will be speaking on leakage management benchmarking and Farshad will speak on asset management customer value, whereas Gary will moderate the Q&A sessions later. Ladies and gentlemen, water losses are one of the main challenges that the water sector faces in most countries. High water losses have, above all, 2 notorious meanings. From one point of view, they imply an environmental loss, and from another point of view, they represent an important economic loss, reflected in the annual profit and loss account of the water services. In Malaysia, this problem is particularly serious as, on one hand, the water losses value is significant, more than 32% in the whole country on the average. In addition, many of today's water utility managers face the challenge of cutting their unacceptably high levels of non-revenue water. Aside from decreasing revenue, money for investment, productivity, and service delivery, non-revenue water also increases the cost of the delivered water. Leakage is certainly one of the crucial issues to be dealt with in order to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of water supply services. Leakage control should be viewed as part of an overall strategy for the promotion of sound operation and maintenance practices. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know very well that a utility can improve and sustain the expected level of service, reduce water losses, cut unit costs, and fairly justify tariff rates if it knows what assets it has and needs, when and how to maintain or replace these assets, and how these assets should be operated. This concept is easier said than done, of course. Policies, plans, practices, and systems need to be put in place and applied by skilled personnel who are committed to caring for assets and meeting service standards. There is no single rapid solution to remedy poor asset management. In a nutshell, asset management involves achieving the least cost and least risk of owning and operating assets over their life cycle, while meeting service standards for customers. Consequently, utilities managers need to put in place policies, plans, and strategies. They must also develop and implement a suite of processes that cover assets acquisition, operation, maintenance, overhaul, and disposal. Asset management also means applying tools that help make these processes effective, such as setting service levels, computing life cycle, assets costs, maintaining an asset register, monitoring asset condition and performance, and carrying out risk analysis of possible asset failure. Asset management for water utilities is more complex than for most other sectors because of the number, variety, age, condition, and location of assets. The magnitude of asset investment and the difficulty of inspecting and maintaining buried assets. This complexity is often compounded by the lack of finance, information, and skills that can impede acquiring, commissioning, maintaining, overhauling, and replacing assets at the optimum time. Increasingly, the practice of benchmarking assets and performance is becoming the norm, adopted by many utilities as an important tool. I sure hope the utilities in Malaysia will come on board and take the opportunity to propose this as a priority action under the coming 12th Malaysia Development Plan. In this regard, I'm glad that the presentation in this webinar that touched on benchmarking in leakage management and also on asset benchmarking customer value are very timely and most welcome. We know that benchmarking utility performance indicators are an essential element of continuous improvement, allowing utilities to track their own performance, compare the results to peers, and identifying areas that could be strengthened or improved. They provide water utility managers with a target against which they can compare their own performances regarding leakage from the system and customer services. All utilities will share their work they are doing in regards to benchmarking utilities performance across the globe, where they can provide objective performance measure for utility leaders to track their organizational performance. To our utility managers who are here this morning and those who are following in the YouTube, if your utility is interested in participating in our utilities benchmarking program, please contact them, and I'm sure they will be most happy to help you and assist you and advise you as to how to move forward. Once again, I would like to say a big thank you to all participants for coming to join us in this webinar, and I wish you all a very fruitful time of discussion and learning together. Please come back for our future webinars lined up in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Now, before our speaker starts with their presentation, a short introduction for them and our moderator for today. Mr. Paul, do you mind sharing the screen of your...
No problems.
Yeah.
Can you see that?
Yeah, here.
Full screen? Okay. What I will do, I think Mr. Lee did a very good job of describing myself and Farshad's background, but I will reinforce that both Farshad and I have conducted extensive benchmarking programs throughout the world in the areas of civil maintenance, mech-elect maintenance, customer service, leakage management, and asset management. And we've found it to be a very, very important tool for comparing organisations across the world, but also for a continuous improvement. So, Mr. Lee, I totally endorse the words that you spoke about earlier around comparing information in order to for organisations to improve and comparing to those throughout the world that are good operators. I might spend a couple of moments introducing ISLE. For those of you that aren't familiar with ISLE Utilities is a global technology and innovation firm. And in our nearly 10-year history, we've identified up to 6,000 technologies that are applicable to the water and wastewater sector by communicating throughout with the industry, with service providers and technologists. Over 200 of those have been commercialised, and we feel like we've been definitely responsible for over $1 billion of external investment in those technologies. We don't necessarily align strongly with the service providers themselves. We work with the utilities to fairly identify good technology and innovation that you should adopt for your own organisations. So we're impartial. We also have a business consulting practice, which complements our technology and innovation practice, and I head up that, as Mr. Lee rightly described in the introduction earlier on. In terms of our footprint, we're, as I said earlier, ISLE is a global business. We have offices in the UK, in the USA, in Germany, in Italy, South Africa, Australia, and Asia, predominantly with Gary in Thailand and with colleagues working out of Manila in the Philippines. So we've got a very big network and a large number of very big and important clients, as you can see there by our slide shown there. I will now move to the leakage benchmarking program. I think what I'd like to start by saying, and once again, following on Mr. Lee's good words, leakage management is one of the most important initiatives being attempted by global businesses around the world at this point in time. So whether you're a very sophisticated business or not sophisticated or big or small, leakage management is important to your survival as an organisation. So this program was generated on the back of some really intense interest from the UK and the Australian water industry around learning more on leakage management. And that's how it was developed early last year. When we ran the program in 2020, we had 16 participants. We had 8 from the UK, which include Thames Water, Yorkshire Water, United Utilities. Sorry, 7 from the UK, all big businesses. 8 from Australia, major businesses in Sydney Water, Hunter Water, SA Water and City West Water, and they're a mixture of metropolitan and regional based businesses. And we had 1 business from Brazil in Aegea who are based in Sao Paulo, and with obviously very high population density and lots of challenges associated with leakage management. So importantly, we had a very good mix of big and small businesses from different international perspectives, which created this very, very interesting program, which I'm about to describe to you. The program has 4 key deliverables or 4 key areas of evaluation. The first is a review of the non-revenue water balance and all the components of that particular balance, and comparing each business across each element of that non-revenue water balance, but also extracting best practices in relation to that non-revenue water balance. The second area, equally as important, is leakage pillars, which include pressure management, active leakage control, speed and quality of repairs, and asset management. And we extracted some great findings through those pillars across the peer group, and some great findings. The program also culminated in the establishment of a number of leading practices, nearly 40 leading practices across non-revenue water and across the leakage management pillars that were shared with the peer group. Some excellent practices that we hope will one day be shared with the Malaysian Water Association. And the main deliverable at the end, which I'll talk about further in a moment, was an industry best practice workshop, which essentially allowed best practice presenters to present their particular practices and share information. Okay, what I will do now is move to firstly, the first part of the work, which was in relation to the review of the non-revenue water balance. Now, this provided a number of key areas of focus. So obviously, we calculated the infrastructure leakage index. We looked at the impact of bulk water pricing on losses. We understood the key components of the non-revenue water balance. So essentially what members were adopting IWA assumptions and what members were using bottom-up calculations to validate their non-revenue water calculation. And we looked at strengths and weaknesses of those calculations. And importantly, we provided all of the organisations with some recommendations for improvement. In the area of unbilled authorised consumption, our focus was primarily on unmetered operational use and mains flushing techniques and what techniques were being adopted and how people and businesses were measuring those flows. In the area of apparent losses, we focused on theft, meter penetration, the type of meter technology being adopted, and meter inaccuracies, which is an important component of the apparent losses calculation. And in the area of real losses, what we attempted to do was to get some idea of what losses were appearing across storage, transmission, distribution, and service connection assets, which provided some own insights. Just quickly touching on some key themes from this part of the study. What we found was there are varying levels of confidence around the non-revenue water calculation. So, for example, if you look closely at the left-hand end of this unauthorised consumption chart, you'll see that a lot of businesses have adopted the IWA assumptions with regard to theft, which is the grey dotted line here. And we've got a lot of businesses on the right-hand end of this chart, which are from predominantly the UK, which are doing bottom-up calculations. Now, the reason that exists is that in the UK, Ofwat has introduced a very strict reward and penalty regime around leakage performance reporting. So most of the UK businesses are moving very, very rapidly to doing bottom-up calculations of their non-revenue water. Whereas in Australia, we are still basically adopting IWA assumptions. Now, this chart is interesting because what it shows is that theft, when measured from bottom up, is significantly bigger than the IWA assumption figure of around 0.1% of system input. As you can see there, varying between 1.5% and 2.5%. So a significant difference in actual theft figures to IWA assumptions. The other important finding was that when we were asking businesses to identify losses according to different asset classes, there was very low levels of confidence to do that. So lots of businesses were able to tell us their network losses at an aggregate level, but not tell us what losses were from a transmission mains, distribution mains, service connections and storage perspective. Now, this is interesting because what we found is that those that had done bottom-up analysis had shown that 50% of real losses were associated with service connections. Yet not a lot of information was captured, as I'll show later, in relation to service connections. There are tools being used throughout the world. So Alan Lambert, who's the guru of water losses in the UK, he has a BABE model, which does quite a lot of predictive modelling around losses throughout the network. Some businesses were using that, but most businesses were unable to break it down according to different asset classes. And as you'll see on this bottom right-hand corner, the chart here, the Australian real losses across distribution, mains and service connections were less than half of what we see in the UK. Less than half. And this might seem like on face value that the Australians could not learn much from the UK, or indeed maybe the Malaysian Water Association may not be able to learn a lot from the UK, but that's false. There are lots and lots of great learnings coming out of the UK and Australia. Another key learning was that with regard to the adoption of technology, no one was using real-time or smart networks to measure non-revenue water in real time. There were pockets of a network where they were applying technology, but not at an aggregate level to do non-revenue water measurement and monitoring at a real-time level across the entire network. Very, very little examples of that. If I now move to the leakage pillars, there were a number of key focus areas here. And what we were trying to do was actually get an understanding of what businesses are doing in regard to these leakage pillars. So what techniques are they adopting, but also what sort of investment are they making in these leakage pillars? And this is an area that provided some really interesting findings. So obviously looking at TOTEX and capital expenditure per property per pillar was a key metric, and looking at the strengths and weaknesses of what businesses were doing here. Particularly in pressure management, we're looking at system pressure differential, PRV and DMA density. We're looking at the type of technologies that were adopted with pressure reducing valves, and that provided some interesting insights. In relation to active leakage control, we're looking at techniques adopted across different asset types, transmission, distribution and service connections, and we got an array of techniques and technologies. We looked at the number of leaks that were occurring. We also looked at the way businesses were using customers to help report leaks, and that provided a really good finding. In the area of speed and quality of repairs, we delved into and analysed the speed, response time and repair time associated with repairs on transmission, distribution, service connection assets. And in this important area of asset management, one of the key things that was important here was understanding what the networks look like from a pipe material and age perspective across transmission, distribution, service connections. And that led to further investigation around distribution mains replacement. So I'll take you into what some of the key findings were here under this important area of leakage management pillars. One of the key findings that stood out to us was that there was a huge difference in the adoption of pressure reducing valves and DMAs between Australia and the UK. So, as I said earlier, this was a real key learning from the UK. The UK, because of the way they've tended to manage networks over the last few years, they've invested heavily into pressure management relative to Australia. They've got big DMA and PRV areas, and they've adopted it at a much higher rate and much higher density than Australia. So they're all the blue dots here, whereas the Australian businesses are all the green dots down the bottom left-hand corner with low DMA and low PRV density. It's an area that really in Australia we haven't done a lot of work on, and it'd be interesting to understand what the Malaysian Water Association and industry is doing with respect to PRVs and DMAs. The other interesting finding was that in Australia, most of the pressure reducing valves were fixed outlet or low technology PRVs, whereas the UK was moving very, very rapidly to advanced and remote control. So their sophistication around pressure management was far higher than Australia, far higher, with high levels of pressure technology being adopted and different systems and processes being used to support their pressure management programs. In active leakage control, what we found was that because Australia has much stronger relationships with our customers, mainly through the fact that we have 100% meter penetration compared to the UK, which is probably only 50%, we had much higher levels of customer engagement in reporting leaks, very high levels. So all of the businesses in Australia reported high levels of customer reported leaks across transmission, distribution, service connection assets in comparison to the UK. But again, in the area of active leakage control, the UK was spending lots more time and money on sensors, acoustic sensors, and rolling them out in the thousands across their network. So in Australia, we've got businesses that are installing 300 to 500 sensors in a part of their network to do active leakage control programs. In the UK, they're rolling out 40,000 sensors. Huge differences. And the UK are instigating training programs in active leakage control, apprenticeships, and a huge investment in capability and competency in active leakage control measurement and monitoring. When we turn to the area of repair and response, the key finding there was that the Australian businesses do tend to repair bursts and leaks much quicker than the UK, primarily because we've tended to prioritise all our leaks and all our bursts very highly. So they get the highest prioritisation, and our community, our government, and our shareholders have very, very low tolerance for a leaking hydrant or a leak in the street. Very low tolerance. So as a result, we've got very high response times and very low repair times, much better than the UK. When we moved to the area of asset management, that provided some really interesting results. So in the UK, very, very high levels of cast iron because their pipes networks were built over 100 years ago, and networks of approximately 100 to 120 years old. Now, they're things that they cannot change and they're stuck with, which is why they adopt pressure management active leakage control, because they sweat the assets. They don't have the pipe replacement programs that we have here in Australia. They use pressure management and active leakage control to sweat the assets. Whereas Australia, we do a lot more main renewal, which I'll talk about in a moment. One of the key findings here across the entire peer group was that in Australia and the UK and in Brazil, very, very low levels of information on service connections. So not much known about material, not much known about age profile of service connection assets. So I was talking to a client only this morning, and they said, we know we've got a lot of poly pipe in our service connections. We don't know what sort of poly pipe it is, and we don't know the age. So service connections is a very unknown area of assets across the peer group. And the other clear finding was that, as I said earlier, which is concerning, is that 50% of real losses are through those assets, and yet businesses don't have much information on these assets. So that's a real concern. As I said earlier, we also collected information in relation to expenditure and investment in water main renewal and asset management. And the most surprising result we found was that the Australian businesses, which tended to have much lower losses, they're all on the left, much lower ILI figures, also had the much higher level of investment in asset renewal. Now, what that showed is that when we delved into the information, is that the reason they do that is they've got higher levels of discretionary spend. They've got boards and regulators that are much more relaxed with water main renewal than the UK, and they therefore invest in it. And it was a crucial finding, because what it showed the UK is that with their low levels of investment in water main renewal and the fact that they've got old pipes and mainly cast iron, they had the highest leakage rates because of those three critical things. As I said earlier, I'll repeat them: age, material, and lower levels of water main renewal were contributing to UK's poorer water loss performance than Australia. That was a key finding. Turning to leading practices, well, as you can imagine, with 16 businesses from around the world, some of them very sophisticated, some less sophisticated, we ended up with a lovely list of leading practices which we shared with the peer group. Some of those were for non-revenue water balance. We've got a number of practices listed there, and many of those were also associated with leakage management pillars. We've got a number of practices there. And they were all provided in our report to all of our clients with a one-page summary for each practice that provided background on what the practice was, the benefits, how it was implemented, some considerations for implementation, and the additional bit of information we provided on all these templates was a contact name, an email address for these practices. So it meant that anyone in the peer group could contact the owner of that best practice and ask them about that best practice in terms of benefits and implementation challenges. So created through that process a strong network of information sharing and access to critical best practices that businesses need to adopt in order to move forward in leakage management. And finally, an important step in our program was the delivery of a leakage management best practice workshop. And we were able to run this in real time using web-based conferencing. So we ran it of an afternoon in Australia, early morning in the UK, and I think it was a rare opportunity for people from the UK and Australia to come together in the same conference and talk about their challenges and share information. Unlike if it had been run in a face-to-face process, we would have had a limited number of attendees. The advantage of doing this was that we had many people dialing in. We had 80 to 100 participants in every workshop talking about their leakage management challenges and sharing their leakage management approaches, particularly around best practice. So it was a wonderful environment for creating stimulated discussion around innovation, technology, and improvement. And most importantly, creating many, many networks and contacts for leakage management going forward. Probably, in my mind, and those that participated, the best part of the entire program. I'd like to finalise or finish with this with a couple of slides, but this process we go through is a very simple 6-step process. I won't talk about this in detail. I'm sure you'll get a copy of this presentation afterwards, but it's basically about collecting data, validating the data, using practice interviews to validate your performance and extract best practices, and then through our reporting and best practice workshops, sharing your performance back with you on how you compare to the peer group, and most importantly, being able to share best practices that we've learned through the process. So it's a well-established process, and I'm sure if you'd listened to Farshad with his AMCV program, it's a very similar process that we go through in delivering AMCV. It's a standard benchmarking approach. Finally, the benefits of this program. Well, we were able to provide some objective performance evidence to all users around leakage management and how they performed against world-class businesses in non-revenue water balance, particularly around the 4 pillars of leakage management. We were able to access some brilliant innovations through the Leading Practices Forum, which we were sharing with businesses. Every single business got an improvement pathway. So when we wrote their report, we looked at their gaps and gave them a customised improvement pathway around how they can improve in leakage. And most importantly, several businesses took the information we provided and adopted and built business cases to justify further investment in leakage management. Thank you. I look forward to your questions at the end of the session. I'd like to now hand over to Farshad Ibrahimi to talk about the Asset Management Customer Value Program. I'll stop sharing.
There is a request, Paul, in the Q&A. He asked Mr. Chow, asked you to show slide 15 again. Maybe you want to take it up straight away. Gary,
Okay.
maybe he wants some clarification. Slide 15.
If you can show slide 15 again.
Which was 15? I don't have numbers here.
Go back 2 more.
That one? Yep.
This one, yes.
I don't know what question he wants to ask. Maybe I explain a little bit more. It's too small to read, actually, Paul.
Maybe you can just explain it a bit more again, yeah. Paul.
Yes, so essentially what we had was a number of practices that were written up around the non-revenue water balance, and they're listed here. So every single one of these lines, is a best practice. And it was from a UK or Australian business. And this is the title of the practice. So we've got practices in estimating fire service volumes. We've got practices in air scouring and water mains to reduce water usage under the area of unbilled authorised consumption. In the area of apparent losses, we had best practices around use of smart standpipes, around businesses that were using digital metering to enhance their meter accuracy, and those that have moved to very good meter replacement strategies in order to optimise meter accuracy. And in the area of real losses, we had examples of businesses that are doing bottom-up calculations of real losses across all their asset classes in order to get a much more exact measure of real losses. We've then got lists of practices here on the right-hand side. So under pressure management, we've got best practices that are written up around remote control pressure management programs and advanced pressure management control programs. In the area of active leakage control, we've got best practices written up around smart water networks being used for leak detection. We've got programs or practices written up around acoustic loggers. We've even got best practices written up around Love Water campaigns or water conservation campaigns that are being adopted by businesses to complement their leakage management programs. We've got best practices around speed and quality of repairs and what businesses are doing there. Some businesses are using contract management to enhance performance in this area. And in the area of asset management, we've got best practices around asset risk modelling, DMA fingerprinting for asset management, and businesses that are using performance data to make renewal decisions as effectively and as efficiently as we can. So all these practices came from all of the participants. So as I said earlier, when they're presented this way, we have the name of the business on the top left-hand corner and all the details of the practice and contact details for the businesses as well. So in essence, I think nearly every single business had at least one best practice that we could show and share with the peer group.
So I guess if Malaysian utilities were to join the 2021 program, then there may be some best practices here that they may be interested to learn from other utilities.
Yep. So all of the participants, Gary, a really good question, get a copy of all these. So we have 36 to 40 of these plates written up. So this is an example of one best practice. We have 40 of these roughly that are written up, and they are included in everyone's report as a leading practices compendium.
And I know from the water industry in Malaysia that there's likely to be some best practices in Malaysia that the other utilities in Australia and UK would be interested to learn from as well.
Yeah, so new practices that we get from our 2021 program will be added to this list and also provided to the peer group. So we hope this will grow to over 50 to 60 leading practices at the end of this year that we share with our participants.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you,
I think we can pass it over to Farshad now for his presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just start sharing my screen. I hope everybody can see that. Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Mr. Lee, for your kind introduction at the beginning of this session. And a big thanks to all the distinguished guests and members of the Malaysian Water Association and everybody else who's on the call today. In case you've missed the introduction, my name is Farshad Ibrahimi. I'm Head of Asset Management for Isle Utilities Asia Pacific. I'm very excited to be able to have this opportunity to talk to you about one of the most topical disciplines, professional disciplines in the world at the moment, the discipline of asset management. And the reason why it's becoming gradually more and more important to utility managers is that it is starting to become more and more recognized as one of the prominent tools to not only manage assets, but also to manage certain aspects of businesses and utilities that deliver essential services to communities. That interest is not only just for the internal stakeholders, but also for the external stakeholders, such as regulators, such as financiers of assets, and believe it or not, even insurance companies, and in some jurisdictions and countries, the taxation departments as well. So it's a discipline that cuts across many, many aspects of businesses. And as was described very well by Mr. Lee earlier on, has lots and lots of aspects across the business that needs to be understood and explored. What I'm talking about today is a specific aspect of asset management, which is how do we benchmark and learn from across the sector on where the areas for improvements would be, and how can we use that to enhance our customer value and delivery of customer value through better asset management. The Asset Management Customer Value Program, as the name suggests, is driven around delivery of better customer value. And this benchmarking program that I'm talking to you about today and some of its outcomes is aligned to and driven by the Water Services Association of Australia as a formal asset management program that has been initiated in the early 2000s. The program has been run every 4 years, non-stop, since the early 2000s, by WASA and its service providers. And it's predominantly been responsible for lifting the asset management standards across the sector globally and within Australia. It's aimed to look at excellence in asset management and how that can be achieved in a systematic and value-added manner, and how participating organisations, be it a WASA member or non-member, can contribute to those discussions and take part in those discussions and learn and offer learnings to others. In the program that was most recently run for WASA in Australia, which Isle Utilities led, we had 19 participating utilities from across Australia, which ranged from statewide utilities to regional utilities. And most importantly, it went through a highly engaging process involving executives right through to practitioners. We had provided an opportunity for executive management groups to have direct feedback and involvement in setting importance and direction based on business drivers and their appetite for risk across the business, and how the asset management assessment process for their organizations should shape up, all the way to subject matter experts in charge of certain parts of the asset management lifecycle, having direct involvement in a self-assessment process to ensure that we've got the full picture around the asset management maturity of each participating organization. And the program was quite sophisticated and ran for a period of over 12 months. And I will explain some of the key processes and outcomes of that program throughout the rest of this presentation. For those who are interested in who the actual 19 utility participants were, this slide provides an overview of those participants. And as you can see, some of you might already be familiar with these organisations, ranging from Melbourne Water, Sydney Water, South Australia Water. I won't go through all of them, all the way down to urban utilities, Tas Water, Goulburn Valley Water. So large, medium, small water and wastewater type functions, bulk water utilities, and therefore a range of different utility types in there as well. The assessment framework that was used in this program was based on a Global Forum in Maintenance and Asset Management, or GFMAM framework, which some of you may already be familiar with. And this is an international framework to which WASA has aligned its benchmarking approach for the first time in the 2020 round of benchmarking. It has 6 subject groups, has 39 subject areas, and 600 to 800 sub-measures at which organisations were assessed. The subject groups are quite extensive and range from strategy and planning to asset management decision-making, life cycle delivery, organisational culture and people, risk and review. And the levels of importance and targets for each organisation was set at the 39 subject areas at the subject areas level, as well as the engagement that occurred with the executives to ensure that they had input at this level to setting what was important to them out of the 39 subjects. Subsequently, the full assessment of the organisation's maturity across each of those 39 subjects and the sub-measures that live within those subjects was carried out by the utility practitioners and subject matter experts at the sub-measures level. So as you can see, the way the assessment framework is set up, it starts high level, but it goes down to and carries out a deep dive into hundreds of measures of end-to-end full lifecycle asset management that covers a variety of different aspects of not just how assets are managed across the business, but what are the implications of those to all the other parts of the business, including risk, stakeholder engagement, competence, operations, maintenance, information systems, knowledge enablement, strategy and planning, and a number of other areas as well. So quite an extensive and sophisticated assessment framework, and utilized in a consistent and objective manner with each participating organization. For those interested in what those 39 subject areas are under the GFMAM framework, and some of you may have seen this before, as you can see, those 39 subjects are listed on this slide. According to this slide, you can see the extent and the coverage of the 39 subjects, which, as I indicated before, cut across just about every aspect of how the business is managed, and how assets are managed through the business, so to speak. So quite a comprehensive assessment framework that WASA has aligned its approach to, and this is exactly how we have used this assessment framework throughout the study. The approach that we've adopted, just as Paul indicated earlier, involved in a highly engaging process with each participating organisation. There was a self-assessment process which helped organisations assess themselves and their maturity in all of the areas that was described earlier through the assessment framework, and using subject matter experts from across the organisation, then validation of those learnings by two highly credible asset management professionals deployed to each organisation to validate their self-assessment scores. And the reason for that validation is to ensure that, one, there's a consistency of approach in the way each organisation self-assess themselves. Two, that we had an opportunity to objectively correct or adjust certain scores where the utility may have been rather harsh on themselves in certain aspects of the assessment, or there may have been slight misinterpretation of the questions. So the validation provides that opportunity to provide those adjustments and calibrations so that all of the participating organisations end up getting a consistent assessment outcome at the end of the day. Each utility was supplemented with a utility report, which was specific to the utility and, important to mention, confidential to the utility. So despite the fact there are several organisations in the program, in this case 19 of them from across Australia, the utility report remains specific and confidential to that utility and contains their strengths, weaknesses, challenges, and most importantly, a documentation of a improvement roadmap to set them up for success moving forward based on where their challenges are and where they need to improve to adopt an asset management systems approach, and in turn provide a means of delivering better customer value and customer outcomes through asset management. The other important deliverable was a leading practices compendium, similar to how Paul described earlier for the leakage benchmarking. The leading practices compendium for the AMCB also provided a standard template which provides a detailed write-up of each leading practice that was culminated from each of the leading participating utilities, in addition to implementation challenges, business benefits, and contact details of subject matter experts for that continuity of discussions beyond the project. So one of the things that we've been looking at doing through these projects is to ensure that once this project is over, that the activity does not stop. So we've made every effort to ensure that the organizations in the program can actually continue to converse with each other, continue to learn from each other, and continue to have that engagement framework and mechanism beyond the project. And the Leading Practices Compendium is one way that they can actually do that. Leading Practices Conference is where the study outcomes culminate into. In this particular program, we had a 3-day Leading Practices Conference at the end of the program, which I'll also talk to in a little bit further detail later on. So that, in a nutshell, is the process that we've adopted as our main approach to undertaking the asset management customer value benchmarking. In terms of some of the indicative results and what we found as outcomes, it is important to note that this program has resulted in an enormous amount of data that has been collated from across all of the 19 participating utilities, and it will do that every time we run the program. So in terms of the enormity of data, the program is very significant. There's lots of interesting insights and outcomes that have come out of the program. What I've shown you here is an example of one of the trends, which is the overall scores at the 39 subjects level for the entire participant group. There's lots of different ways we've cut and carved the data that we've got from the program. We've looked at it from an overall participants perspective and key trends, but we've also looked at the data at the subgroup level, peer group levels, if you like, as well. And I've got some examples of those to show you as well. This particular chart shows you the overall participant group scores at the 39 subjects. The bars are indicating where each subject was scored and what was the median score of each subject across the full 19 participating groups. So it's a lot of information shown on this chart. The yellow dots are showing, or the diamonds are showing, the targets that have been set across the sector as well. So as you can see, there are lots of areas where there's a large gap between where the industry is at and where they're targeting or aspiring to be across certain subjects, and made about what's driving that gap. What are the closing strategies for those gaps and the improvement opportunities, but most importantly, what is fit for purpose? What does excellence mean for certain organizations? Lots of questions asked by organizations to try and understand what it is that they need to invest in to ensure that a maturity increase for their organization from, say, a level 3 to a level 4 or a level 5 is an objective pathway or a journey for them, and it makes sense to invest in those areas. Not every organization that we came across were in the mindset that they must be playing at the excellence level, they must be a level 5, for example, across every one of the 39 subjects. Some organizations were quite content for certain subjects to remain at a competency level or a level 3 as their asset management maturity. So it has generated a lot of interesting discussion on that front, but most importantly, a key discussion on a balance of investment versus effort versus outcome. Where do we need to invest to get the most optimum outcome for our businesses to ensure that we are able to demonstrate that those investments are culminating into delivery of better customer value? Throughout all of what we've done, we've always tried to connect back to the core objectives of the program to say, we're not here to just do asset management. We're here to do asset management for better customer outcomes. And that's remained at the heart of everything that we've done. And that's what makes this program one of the most valuable programs in the world, because we're not just doing it for the sake of creating data, and we're not just doing it for the sake of creating metrics and playing around with numbers. We are delivering it in a meaningful and objective manner to try and give organizations, their practitioners and executives, meaningful insights on how they can invest in certain areas to improve, but most importantly, to improve their customer delivery and customer value outcomes at the end of the day. So lots and lots to talk about in terms of the results, and lots of meaningful insights that have come out of those results as well. To continue giving you a little bit more of an indication of some of the other results, as I indicated earlier, we also looked at peer groups. So in this particular program, we divided the 19 utilities into a number of peer groups. So there were utilities that were deemed as large utilities based on the number of population that they serviced, based on their customer base, service type, etc. There were utilities that were a statewide versus a regional, and etc. So what we did with the data is not only did we provide the overall comparisons, but we also made comparisons at the peer group level. And that made the comparisons a lot more meaningful, a lot more objective for those groups, because they do adopt different management strategies. So what a statewide organization would adopt as an asset management strategy and a strategic plan and the level of investment that they put behind their asset management may not be completely suited or appropriate for a small regional utility who has a very different demographic to service. They've got different customer base, they've got different physical assets to manage, and therefore those peer groupings and the analytics at the peer groupings have made a lot of sense and have been quite valuable. Within those peer groupings, we've provided data analytics by looking at industry median scores, by looking at targets or median targets for the industry, by looking at maximum scores, and doing that in two different ways, as I said before, for the entire group and repeating all of that for the subgroups or the peer groups as well. One of the examples of that chart in a little bit more detail is provided on this slide here. And as you can see, this is indicating the median for a peer group. And so it indicates that very quickly through this circumplex chart that the majority of the 39 subjects or end-to-end asset management that carries out within this group are in the competent level. And in fact, there are areas where the peer group are playing at the excellence level, i.e. beyond level 3 or competence. So what this has shown us is that there are, as well as opportunities for improvement, and as well as some of the gaps that I indicated earlier in the overall scores, there are also areas where the organizations are leading and are presenting a lot of excellence. What we wanted to do through this program, and we will do in the future, is to keep a balanced approach. And that balanced approach is to recognize where excellence is practiced, to recognize where organizations have actually previously invested, and how they've made the best use of that investment for knowledge share and for others within the benchmarking group to also learn from. So it's not all about finding gaps. It's not all about finding improvement opportunities. It's also about recognizing where there's areas of excellence and for others to learn and opportunities for knowledge share. Some of the other indicative results also go to conducting comparisons of historic results. So in this instance, what you are seeing is a comparison at the 6 subject group level of how the Australian water sector has come across and evolved over the last 4 years. As I mentioned before, this program gets run every 4 years for the WASA members. And in this particular instance, the last time it was run was in 2016. And as you can see, in the last 4 years across the Australian sector, there's been some areas that have improved substantially, but at the same time, there has been areas where there's been a clear decline. Where there's been a higher level of improvement has been around asset management strategy and planning. Where there's been some decline is around asset management decision-making, risk and review, and continuous improvement. There's been lots of discussion around what's driven these trends and what has caused certain aspects, for example, asset management strategy and planning, to substantially improve over a period of 4 years across the sector, whilst risk and review and decision-making capabilities are dropping. This has generated an interest in discussions at the executive levels as well as at the operational levels. And to some degree, there's some interesting insights that we came across, and some of those were around the realization of benefits of asset management investment. Some organizations, even in this day and age, even with all of the investment that has been put behind strategy and planning, are still finding it difficult, are still finding it challenging to highlight the value proposition of asset management internally, to prove to their boards and executive managements that investment in certain aspects of asset management will culminate into benefits across the asset life cycle. The other parts of what has caused some of the decline is in asset management decision making, for example, has been driven by lack of competence or gradual decline of asset management competence at certain levels of organizations. We have a highly sophisticated set of utilities who've participated in this program, and they always have. However, there's always also been a fluctuating level of competence within those individual utilities and at various levels of the utilities, be it at the senior level or a practitioner level, whereby asset management competence has not been a key focus. That lack of competence has culminated into asset management not getting the recognition through the business cases, through the investment decision-making opportunities that it deserves. And thereafter, the result has been that there's a gradual decline across the sector in asset management decision-making. That is a concern. It's a concern for the executive leadership of organizations, and it is something that drives other gradual decreases across things like asset lifecycle management, things like operations and management decision-making, things like configuration management, and some of the other more tactile aspects of asset lifecycle management, which are not only affected by that competency aspect, but they're also affected by the lack of definition of what some of those aspects mean. For example, configuration management at the moment is one of the most confused subjects of the 39 GFMAM subjects across the industry. Despite the fact there's been a lot of work done to highlight what configuration management should be, and there are in fact even guidelines that WASA has produced in the past about configuration management, at the practitioner level, it is still being practiced inconsistently. And so those also line up and connect back to some of the competency issues and decision-making issues that we referred to before. So there's been lots of those kind of insights that have come out of the historic comparisons. There's been lots of insights that have come out of the overall utility comparisons amongst each other and amongst their peer groups and subgroupings as well. Some of the challenges that we've come across throughout the study, as I mentioned before, the study has traditionally come away with lots and lots of insights and learnings, and data has been themed into certain trends, if you like. Some of those key themes are listed here. So, for For example, one of the key themes that have come out of the AMCV program in 2020 has been asset management strategy planning, driving customer value. The other prominent theme that have come out is digital technologies supporting asset management delivery. And that cuts across many aspects, including asset information systems and the way they've been set up, delivery of systems integration programs, use of, for example, BIM and 3D all the way to 7D technologies in supporting asset management delivery and so on. Another clear theme that have come out as theme number 3 is whole of business asset management and application of AMS. One of the underlying objectives of the GFMAM and the WASA approach is to help encourage organizations to move towards adoption of a management systems approach to asset management. And the reason why this was a clear theme is, despite the fact a lot of organizations have put in a lot of investment behind their strategy and planning, development of lots of asset management plans, strategic asset management plans, risk management frameworks, etc., there's still a clear knowledge gap and an improvement required in adoption of an AMS. And so that has been a clear point of discussion and a theme as well. The other clear theme was asset management benefits realization. As I pointed out before, lots of organizations in this program have stated that business cases leading to substantial investment in asset management planning and even delivery of certain capital programs has not been supplemented with a clear benefits realization framework to justify where the investments have culminated into useful and objective outcomes. That remains to be a key issue across the sector and therefore a theme in our study. Challenges associated with lifecycle activities contains lots of different aspects of operations, maintenance, asset valuation, configuration management, and a number of other aspects of the asset lifecycle that has been themed across this particular topic. And the last one is culture, capacity, and competence helping to manage change. This one has been quite an important theme, as I mentioned before, and probably one that continues to repeatedly come up in every benchmarking program that we have run in the past. I have personally been involved with 3 of them now in the last 20 years, and the cultural aspect of asset management has come up as a key theme each time. So it's telling us that there's an underlying set of challenges within organizations in driving asset management awareness, in driving asset management competence, in driving a certain culture around highlighting the fact that asset management is not a secondary discipline, but rather a primary discipline within any organization who owns and operates assets to deliver services. So there's been lots of different aspects that have been culminated under these themes, and we can talk about them for a long time. But what's important here is across each of these themes, what we identified were improvement initiatives. So each of the 19 organizations in the program were provided with improvement initiatives that related back to those themes, and those improvement initiatives were written into their specific utility reports as a roadmap for improvement. And we had over 80 of them, so lots and lots of improvements from the contingent group here. And on the flip side, to keep a balanced approach, we've also had leading practices that have been identified under those themes. So as I indicated earlier, we wanted to make sure that as we are identifying improvement opportunities for the industry, that we also recognize where certain organizations are doing well and in fact are leading the pathway and providing excellence in certain aspects of asset management. And as a result, we've been able to identify over 50 leading practices in this program alone, and those leading practices have been documented into a substantial leading practices compendium, which has also been provided to every utility participant in the program as part of one of the key deliverables. So at the sort of concluding remark, I think I'd like to finish off by a couple of slides on the leading practices conference, as I indicated earlier, which has been the main focal point of a lot of the learnings that have occurred through this program traditionally, and it has given us that sort of leverage and that opportunity to bring together key practitioners and subject matter experts, owners of those leading practices that have been identified through the program, and hear from them firsthand. This leading practices conference has been an amazing opportunity to for the utilities to showcase what they do best, for the utilities to get recognized. So the leading practices conference is all about the utilities. It's all about recognition of what they do best, but at the same time to provide that mechanism and that pathway for others to engage with them, to learn firsthand what their challenges has been in reaching those leading practices, and so on and so forth. We had a fantastic opportunity to hear from CEOs of organizations all the way to practitioners and young professionals of those participating organizations as well. We had an opportunity to deliver a panel session, which was not only set up and included people from the utilities, but also from other bodies like regulators, and to provide a balanced discussion point and to leave it open for all participants to ask directly from a regulator, from a senior director or a CEO of an organization, what their journey has been in asset management, where they see improvements, how they can engage further, and have that healthy debate in a live manner. And so we were able to do all of that online, as Paul also mentioned earlier. Our 3-day leading practices conference was ran completely online. It had over 100 participants over the 3 days, and we were very pleased with the level of engagement that occurred within the program and post the program as well. So to finish off, I'd like to provide a few broad points about the sort of the benefits of the program. As I mentioned before, there's lots of benefits associated with the program, but the key ones are really to deliver a mechanism for sort of sustained performance of organizations moving forward, providing a global assessment framework that allows organizations to be objectively assessed irrespective of where they're at and without any geographic borders. And I think that's a very important benefit, particularly now that WASA has used or has moved to the use of a global assessment framework. There's a lot of cross-sector learning. There's a lot of opportunity for engagement and also lots of opportunity for sharing leading practices and being recognized, and for utilities to take pride in where they have invested and where they've come to delivering excellence in asset management as well. The other important aspects is that it does provide the utility with an opportunity to have their executives right through to their practitioners be engaged in the program, have her first-hand involvement in delivery of the program, break down some of the silos, get the organization to understand where they're at in terms of the richness of the documents that they have, in terms of what it is that they are missing and what it is that they can improve on as well. And most importantly, to be able to have a roadmap for improvement moving forward. So that's all I have for discussion today. I hope that's provided you with some insights on our process and some of the outcomes we achieved through this program, and happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speakers. I think we can pull out the poll right now. Is that okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
I'll stop sharing.
All right. Yeah.
Joe, is there any
All right.
more questions? Huh?
I hope everyone can see there's a quick poll on the screen at the moment. We would really appreciate it if you can join.
There are 4 questions, so please scroll down, and you can go to the next 2 questions. Participants, please scroll. After you finish the first 2, you can scroll.
Expert.
Okay, tunjuk result.
Wait, people are still doing the question? Yeah.
Kira tak payah lama sangat.
There's only 28 at the moment. Is that okay to share?
Share lah, share.
Yeah, all right. Wait. Yep. As you can see, this is the poll result moment. I'll pass it to Mr. Gary for...
Gary, you just read.
Yeah, okay. So if we look at the first question, which is, given the current NRW problem in Malaysia, do you think the time is right for water utilities in Malaysia to also adopt leakage benchmarking approach to enhance the NRW program? And 86% of participants have said, yes, the time is right. Question number 2 in your expert opinion, can Malaysian water utilities benefit through participating in a global program? And 86% have said yes again. Which of the following do you think Malaysian water utilities should adopt for a start in order for them to see benefits in being benchmarked? And this is a bit of a mixture. We have 21% saying they should be benchmarked across Malaysian water utilities only, 48% across Asian utilities, and 31% have said globally. So that's an interesting mix of opinions there. And then given the evolution of the local water sector, what asset management challenges are most important across the sector? So we have 55% for strategic, 10% for tactical, and 34% for competency. So it looks like strategic is key, and competency is also a key factor in asset management in Malaysia. Okay, so that was good. I think the polls were very interesting, and I think we'll move on to Q&A now. And we have had quite a few questions that have come in through the Q&A function on Zoom. And we've also had a few come in through the YouTube channel. So we have people watching on YouTube and they've come in as well. And we have a couple of questions which are quite similar. One from Hani and one from James. Hani asked, it would be great if you could show how these apply to the Malaysian scenario. So for both the leakage and the asset management. And James's question, which is quite similar, is any comments on NRW or leakage management and asset management in Malaysia water utility operators? So I think we'll start with Paul on that one, but I'll come to you later, Farshad, as well, and get your opinion.
I think in answer to that, the Malaysian water industry, like most of the world, follow the IWA non-revenue water balance calculation. So that's a standard. So that means that what we've done is effectively measure those businesses in our program that do that well and some that need to improve. Because that IWA non-revenue water balance is an international standard, it means it's completely comparable to the Malaysian Water Association. I would imagine most of your members, if not all, would be using that calculation. And the findings that we found with regard to the adoption of the IWA assumptions versus bottom-up calculations are going to be immense learnings for Malaysian water businesses. In relation to the pillars themselves, once again, most businesses, or nearly every business in the world, is using pressure management, active leakage control, speed and quality of repairs, or asset management as an approach to leakage management. Some are using all of them, some are using some of them, some are using some pillars more than others or more than each pillar. But the learnings we got from that, we believe, are as equally applicable to the Malaysian Water Association as they are to the rest of the world. And I must say on that I'm confident, based on what I do know of Malaysian Water Association's performance with regard to non-revenue water, that there will be some really good findings in relation to the pillars themselves. And what I'm learning through others is in the area of active leakage control and definitely technology and pressure management. So I look forward to seeing some great practices from the association there.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Farshad, do you have any further comments?
I think what I'd like to add on the asset management component of that question is, businesses in Asia particularly are subject to the same levels of regulatory and ownership pressures as they are in any other part of the world. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, part of the objective of a program like this is to go beyond just finding areas to improve, but it's how do you improve your communication with your external stakeholders to get the most leverage out of what it is and where it is that the business needs to invest to improve outcomes for customers. One of the leading trends, particularly in Australia, that a lot of other organizations in the world are following, is to move away from an asset-centric view to a customer-centric view of asset management. And that in itself is going to provide, I think, a fair bit of leverage for the Malaysian water authorities to engage with. And the use of GFMAM as a global assessment framework will also place the Malaysian water utilities, in my opinion, on the same banding for measurement and comparison to any other utility, irrespective of where they are in the world. So they could be a utility that could be compared with in the Americas, in Australia, in Europe, in the Middle East. It'll provide that objective comparability as well.
And following on from that, Farshad, we have a question from Lim, who says, good asset management is often tied up with financial capability and feasibility. So with the low tariffs that we have in Malaysia, which means a lot of utilities don't actually make a profit, how would that affect the asset management program, really, or what they're doing in asset management?
Yeah, that is actually a very good question. And you'd be pleased to know that even advanced asset managers and some of the rich organizations in Australia have gone through that pressure before. When we had drought here, utilities, for example, were pushing for residents not to use water. Therefore, they were actively impacting their own revenue. So they didn't have as much water to sell. So that will put a lot more financial pressure on the utility. This is no different. So if the tariffs are low and there is still a pressure to deliver services, asset management, in fact, would be one of the most optimum tools you could use across the business to improve some of the organizational culture, competence, and in fact, some of the tactile aspects of the business by and then essentially improving your operational and business resilience. And that's not going to require a lot of heavy investment, even if you are under that sort of scenario of going through a low tariff situation.
And I suppose the results of the program could be used to justify tariff increases. If you're looking at what programs you need to introduce and then take them to the regulator to justify some increases.
Correct. Yes. So part of for example, the AMCB program is to focus on customer value. What does the customer value at the end of the day? Do they want, better services? What's the sort of the willingness to pay for those better services? What those better services mean in terms of the organization investing further in their physical assets, be it asset renewals, rehabilitations, construction of newer and more advanced treatment facilities, et cetera, et cetera. So at the end of the day, there is an equation that will work and it can be made to work to the favor of the utility and the customers in adopting a revised asset management strategy, if you like, and taking all of that into account.
Okay, thank you, Farshad. We've got another question for Paul, which is from Mohammed Nizam, and he said, how to improve or enhance customer involvement capability to help reduce non-revenue water. I know this is one of a few of the best practices that came out of the leakage management benchmarking, especially from Australia. How were they doing it?
Well, took several approaches actually, Gary. They were posting lots of water conservation messaging on their website. They also post a lot of water conservation messaging on bills that go out quarterly. There's a lot of direct marketing to their customers, so brochures and pamphlets, which would be dropped into letterboxes and advising them on the importance of obviously using less water and water conservation. But probably most importantly is that they do a lot of stakeholder engagement. So they get out into the community. They talk about their water conservation strategy with the community. They involve the community in discussions around what assets need to be replaced versus repaired, what programs of work they're going to implement in relation to leakage management. And they get their community to endorse those programs through heavy stakeholder engagement.
Okay, thank you. We've had another question for Farshad from Hanifa, which is, based on question number 4 on the polls, can you please elaborate more on the differences in approach based on strategic, tactical, and competency?
Yeah, sure. I'm glad somebody asked that question. I think the major difference is at the strategic level. We are aiming at getting leadership buy-in. That has been one of the most substantial hurdles globally when we're talking about asset management is, and in fact, one of the key aspects that the likes of ISO 55001 and some of the other global frameworks like GFMIM are also encouraging and pushing for is to increase the leadership and executive buy-in of asset management before you actually do anything else. So at the strategic level, that will ensure that, you know, a lot of the programs that are then invested in are supported, and that support runs down into having the right tools, having the right processes, having the right IT strategy and information management strategies in place to be able to deliver what you need to deliver out of your strategic plan. At the tactical level, you're looking at operationalizing some of those strategic plans, and that those operationalizations are going to run into, you know, your resourcing strategies, your procurement strategies, your risk management strategies, and whether you're able to link your operational risks to your business risks, for example. And so it's tackling at those levels and ensuring that that strategic improvement and executive level buy-in is flowing all the way down to the operational level of asset management through a clear line of sight. And what we want to do from a tactical, strategic to a tactical level transitioning is to ensure that we create that line of sight, and that line of sight is engaged with and is transparent, understood, and supported by all involved throughout the organization as key stakeholders. So that's your sort of relationship between the strategic and tactical. Competence level, as I indicated earlier as well, it actually plays across both of those. The competence level plays across the level of support you can get from a typical management group. Now, I've got instances, I've got training background myself where I've had executives through to practitioners in a training course for asset management, right? And more often than not, I've had people who have confessed at the most senior level that asset management was something that they always came across and they thought they knew, but they never had the opportunity to formally learn and get competent in it. And one of the core reasons for that is throughout the world, our educational systems do not recognize asset management as a subject or a professional discipline that needs to be taught at universities and as part of professional training. Yet most of what professional engineers and scientists end up with as part of their working career is some form of an involvement throughout the asset life cycle, be it as the construction part of the asset life cycle, be it at the operations and maintenance, be it at the decommissioning, be it at the process management, information technology side of it. They are working with a part of the asset life cycle. So if the competency is lacking, or people as professionals never had the opportunity to become competent in the discipline of asset management at a professional level, then that's going to have an impact on how tactical and operational and strategic level asset management can be deployed in an organization.
And I'm guessing when you actually ask a utility the 800 questions under the 6 themes, there's probably quite a few questions that many utilities have never thought about before. So it's never been on their radar, and it maybe opens their eyes a bit.
Absolutely. Part of this process is actually a learning curve for all involved in the program. So we have come across instances in the past where certain subjects have been quite blurry in the way an organization understood that subject to be, and versus what they find through and learn through the questions that are incorporated as sub-measures within that subject. I gave configuration management as an example. There are many other examples like that. Stakeholder engagement, for example, is a subject of the 39 subjects. So once you go through the sub-elements of what we actually test for through those subjects, you'll be surprised to learn as to how many parallels we can draw between a configuration management or a stakeholder engagement subject, which on the face of it does not even remotely relate to asset management. You'll be surprised at how we can draw parallels from those into asset management, and the relevance of those subjects to how your strategic asset management plans are actually deployed across your asset management strategy. So there's lots of opportunity like that to learn.
Okay, thank you. A question for Paul, which comes from YouTube, from the people watching on YouTube, is each utility has its own base level of performance. What standards or levels does IOL use to measure against each country, which were different, and even amongst first and developing countries? And I know in last year's program, you actually had one utility from Brazil, which stood out from the UK and the Australian utilities.
Yeah, so the short answer there is that the metrics we adopt are as equally applicable to a developed versus less developed business. We don't do lots of adjustment in the numbers of performance to reflect different climatic conditions or soil conditions or different material conditions. But what we do through our process is we can do comparisons at an industry level. So we can compare an Asian business to other Asian businesses in terms of benchmarks, and we can compare them to the entire peer group. But more specifically, I spoke earlier around our process, how we conduct practice interviews. The process of practice interviews is really to verify what's creating differences in your performance to either Asian peers or the global peer group. And we can provide qualitative commentary around that, which allows us to more or less adjust, I wouldn't say adjust, but describe performance in the context of saying the reason your performance may be better or worse than your peer group is because of reasons A, B, and C. Now, the example I provided consistently in my presentation is that the clear reason the UK perform worse than Australia is that they have cast iron pipes over 100 years old. We have nothing like that in Australia. And no matter what they do, whether they undertake pressure management or active leakage control, that's not going to change that. So we will certainly cover for that in the commentary, in our recommendations, and we can also do some, as I said earlier, specific performance comparisons to Asian peers or to businesses that are water only or water and wastewater, or to businesses of different size. We can do all of those things to ensure that you have a more equitable comparison.
And of course, for the 2021 program, we are talking to a number of Asian utilities and looking to develop an Asian peer group.
Yes, we are, and no, we can even cut that further, as I said earlier, by whether they do water and wastewater or only water, and also based on number of connections, we can do peer group, if you like, peer group comparisons based on size. So you're dead right, Gary. We're looking at US, Asia, Australia, and Europe or UK specifically as our peer group for this year. Right.
Okay. We have another question from Hanifa, which is interesting. I think we'll go with Farshad first, which is, who drove the benchmarking programs both in Australia and the UK? Was it the government regulator, or did you go direct to the utilities?
So the program in Australia was predominantly driven by the Water Services Association of Australia, who's the peak body for the water utilities in Australia. That has been driven by a sheer amount of interest by those members. WASA has around 70 water utility members across Australia and New Zealand who have shown interest in ongoing and continuous improvement of asset management. And in response to that, WASA has designed and developed this program in the last 20 years, which has been running every 4 years to respond. The program, in terms of the benchmarking that has been deployed in the past in UK, in Americas, in Europe, not in Europe, in Asia and in Middle East, were also the same programs that were delivered by WASA. So the credibility of this program dates back to the early 2000s, in which both Paul and myself were luckily involved in delivery of those programs in, I think, 2008 and 2012 specifically. And I recall we had 40 plus organizations globally each time participating in the program and reaping all the benefits we spoke about in this presentation. So all of the organizations from Americas, from Asia, Middle East, Australia, New Zealand, being under the same roof, engaging, learning from each other, exchanging details, getting each other's leading practices, etc., etc.
But I'm guessing that the fee to join the program was paid by the individual water utilities, not by by WASA or the other associations.
Correct. Yes. So WASA has a membership fee that it normally charges its members, but then they also deploy asset management programs each year, and they go out with an expression of interest to all their members, and each member will then have the option of joining any one of those asset management programs for an additional fee on top of their subscription fee. Okay,
thank you. And Paul, what about the leakage management benchmarking? How was that? Was that through the regulator or direct with the utility?
Well, it was actually something that we saw, as I said earlier, something that we saw as a very important initiative being attempted around the world, regardless of whether you're big or small or sophisticated or not sophisticated. What helped the program substantially was that the Australian businesses have always had a focus on leakage management. We have to. We have periods of several years where we can have drought. And secondly, the change in regulation in the UK through the Office of Water meant that all of a sudden there was a much tougher reporting regime around leakage and reporting. and also around the reward and penalty regime that was associated with leakage. So they needed to get better data to justify where they sit relative to others in the UK, and much better practices to show or prove how they can improve. Whereas in Australia, it was considered an ongoing desire to keep improving in leakage management as part of our drought management and leakage management and demand management philosophies that we've been working on here for over 15 years. So it was industry driven to an extent and regulatory driven out of the UK.
And another question for you, Paul, is does IOL do follow-up for improvement after the initial benchmarking? Recommended processes or technologies or tools, and what is the estimated time for a fair improvement of performance and cost and time involved?
Well, I think our standard program, I'll take the cost question first. Our standard program in Asia Pacific is around about $35,000 Australian per participant. But what I will say is that we can do better than that price if we have a cohort from Malaysia joining together and we get scale, which means that we can do a much better price than that. On the question of improvement, what I'm recommending to most businesses is they benchmark at least every second or third year. So not every year. It's a process of collecting data, and performance benchmarking takes time. So you wouldn't want to do it every year, but at least every 3 years as a performance check as to where you're going. What we are asking all of our participants to do is to come to every best practice workshop. They'll be run every year going forward. So come to those. Even though you may not have participated in the program for that year, listen to the best practices, but more importantly, listen to businesses who have been adopting best practices and how they have improved. So what's been the quantum of improvement for them? So that's a recommended process that we'd advise. In terms of performance improvement advice to specific businesses, that sort of work would be costed individually and would depend on the scope and or breadth of work that you require us to do.
Okay, Farshad, do you have anything to add on that, on your benchmarking?
Yeah, can I just add that despite the fact that we are saying WASA have run these programs, it is worth mentioning that we are now licensed by WASA to run this program, the AMCV benchmarking program, globally. So if a utility wants to join the 2021 program, they do not have to be a WASA member. They can still join a program, and we are looking at running a program across Asia, Europe, Americas, so there's lots of opportunity to participate.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're coming to the end now of the Q&A, and I apologize if I haven't asked everybody's questions. If anybody has any burning questions that they want to ask the three of us, you can see I've put our emails into the chat function. So feel free to email us with specific questions, or if you're interested to learn more about either of the programs, then you can email us as well. So thank you very much.
Okay, I think that's all the time we have for today.
Yeah.
We would really want to say thank you to Mr. Farshad and Mr. Paul Harris, Mr. Gary Wai, for your time. I think it's already evening at your site in Australia, right? It's 3 p.m. if I'm not mistaken at the moment. So thank you so much. Mr. Gary is based in Thailand, if I'm not mistaken. So I think yours is still in the morning, right?
Yes, yep, nearly lunchtime.
Nearly lunchtime. All right. I guess that's all we have, the time we have today. So thank you very much. I hope to see you all next time. Thank you for all the participants. Mr. Lee, do you have anything to add? I think you're on mute, Mr. Lee.
So, okay, thank you very much, gentlemen, for your sharing with us. I think it's been very helpful, and it actually opened our eyes a little bit more to the need for benchmarking, the importance of placing benchmarking into our daily operations, especially for the utilities as well as some of the water companies. I hope that some of the water utilities who are following this will be able to hear some of the experiences from WASA and also from Paul and Farshad, how we can really think of something that we can maybe want to think of an action that we can do. MWA is ready to come in to act as a middleman to help bring the water utilities together if they want to have a program similar to what WASA is doing in Australia. And perhaps we can also explore a little bit more of how we can also join WASA instead of creating something new. If WASA we can also hop into their program and join them, also can. I think that there's another avenue open for us. I think the problem with the Malaysian water utilities is because of the financial constraints that we are facing. And therefore, our focus and our priority has been distracted or diverted to something more urgent. And maybe we don't see the urgency, the importance, the benefits from benchmarking as was shared today. And I hope that today's session will be able to bring us to a greater understanding on the need, because by so doing it, I think we can also improve, and also in the meanwhile, improve our service delivery, and the cycle will go around, and it will really definitely bring a lot of benefits, and bring back the good name of our water suppliers, because we have been suffered quite a lot due to financial constraints, and also due to the climate change environment, and of course the politics that's been going around us. So again, thank you very much, Gary, for helping us to make the context to organize with our utilities, and thank you, Paul and Farshad, for your very insightful sharing this morning in Malaysia. So we hope that we can be able to contact you again, see you once again some other time under some similar subjects, and that we wish you all the best. Thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you,
everyone.
Mr. Lee.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you,
Bye.
Mr. Lee. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hope everyone stays safe.
Okay. Bye. Yeah.
Bye.